Hi, my name is Basma Kazaroni,
And I'm Fawziya Kiwan.
and we are behavioral therapists. I studied my bachelor's in graphic communication design in Newcastle. And during the end of my bachelor degree, I have realized I actually wanted to give more for my country. So I decided to change my career path completely and decided to study my master's in special needs education. In 2008, I returned to Bahrain and I've tried to use my skills to teach kids with difficulties, but I've noticed that it wasn't enough. And I thought that maybe I needed to study more to able to give more. Until 2010, I've seen a person perform an ABA with a nonverbal autistic child and transitioning him to able to start using his wants and his needs. That has struck my attention. So I've decided in 2011 to study my applied behavior analysis with Florida Institute of Technology.
My journey with applied behavior analysis started when I was doing my undergraduate work at Clark University in Boston, Massachusetts. I met a family that was looking for a person to work with their child diagnosed with autism as a behavioral therapist. At the time, I had no idea what the field of ABA was all about. I was then recruited and trained by a visiting consultant from one of the leading ABA clinics in the United States. Shortly after that, I fell in love with the field of ABA and the ability to help modify behavior and improve people's lives. I then decided to pursue my master's degree from the University of North Texas and pursue a board certification. From that point, ABA has become not only a career choice, but rather a passion in my life. I've been working in the field of ABA for the last 17 years, serving clients from ages of 2 to 22. I have then went on to further education and received a dual master's degree in applied behavior analysis and developmental psychology. I've accrued over 1,500 hours of supervised field work in preparation for my board certification as a behavior analyst. Applied behavior analysis is the scientific study of the environment and its effect on human behavior. ABA is a type of therapy that focuses on improving specific behaviors such as social skills, communication, language skills, independent living skills, and even job performance and punctuality. A behavior analyst could either target skill acquisition or behavior management. ABA is different than the traditional psychology in that we focus on observable behavior that are visible to the world, rather than internal feelings and emotions that happen within the inside of the body. We set up tiny goals and benchmarks that amass and put together can transform a child from being withdrawn and more focused on their inner world to being part of their community, being able to tolerate the classroom, participate in social skills, follow instructions provided by the teacher, and of course, having their needs and wants met. This doesn't come from broad sweeping goals. It comes from daily, consistent, and systematic interventions put in place that help achieve those goals. There are a lot of strategies used in applied behavior analysis, such as task analysis, which breaks down those large tasks into small, achievable benchmarks. We do prompt fading so that the assistance that we provide is eventually faded away and the child becomes more independent. We do shaping and chaining to allow us to reach the optimal goal or the task that the child needs to complete. There are a lot of different strategies used in ABA that have been evidence-based to change behavior and modify behavior over time.
ABA has been more recognized or used for children with autism, when actually it is much broader and used for many different fields. Everything we do is based on ABA principles, where actually learning occurs through rewards and punishment. The great thing about ABA, it can be used in many different areas, such as organization behavior management, education sectors, animal training, even traffic control, helping the elderly, or a patient with brain damages. And it can also be used with a person with obsessive compulsive disorder or post-traumatic stress disorder and ADHD.
B.F. Skinner is considered the grandfather of ABA. Dr. Skinner believes that behavior is changeable through positive reinforcement. Skinner determined that through learning and through repetitive reinforcement, we are wired to perform the behaviors that are reinforced. And the behaviors that are not reinforced, they dissipate and they disappear from our repertoire. Skinner's research is found in every aspect of our everyday. For example, if we take a little child taking her first few awkward steps, she is met with a very enthusiastic mother who then cheers her on. This reinforcement gives the signal to the child to try to take more steps. And this is how we learn how to walk, how to talk, and we also learn how to not touch the hot stove, for example. The applications of ABA have gone past just the field of discrete trial training or at the table work. There are examples of pivotal response training, augmentative communication, picture exchange communication systems, direct instructions. Those are all strategies that have helped children learn and acquire skills that they otherwise would not have been able to. So the main question is that what causes behavior? As you may suspect, this is not a simple answer. In applied behavior analysis, it is believed that all behaviors occur for a reason or serve a function. The functions of our behaviors stem from three major drives. The first one is learning history, and the second is our anatomy or biological functions, such as neurons or hormones or our muscles. And the last one is the environmental variables, and basically that's everything that is outside of our human body. And that's really where applied behavior analysis focuses on modifying the environment to change behavior. So why do we care about the function of behavior? Through the knowledge of what the function of the behavior is, we are able to modify the environment to make small changes in behavior. And not only that, but we also provide alternative behaviors that are more socially acceptable, that are more appropriate, that will serve the same function to the child.
So there are four major types of functions. Another word for function, as Fawzia has mentioned, is reasons. Number one, sensory. Number two, escape. Number three, attention. And number four, tangible. Sensory is something that makes you feel good. For example, itching, flapping your hands, sucking your thumb, or putting things in your mouth, or playing with your hair. Number two, escape. Usually it's something we don't want to do. For example, we usually tend to see this as parents, is that when our kids don't want to do our homework. That is another sort of example of an escape. Or when we put up vegetables for our children to try to eat it, and they try to push their vegetable around in the plate in order to escape not to eat their vegetables. As a teacher, you also seen that in the classroom. For example, a child's talking to his friend when he's supposed to be doing his independent seat work. Or our kids trying to stall a conversation when it's actually bedtime routines. Number three, attention, is another word of saying, here, look at me, here I am. Sometimes the attention is neither deliberate or positive attention. For example, getting yelled at can be also a sort of form of attention-seeking behavior, or seeking for compliments by pointing out their achievement, or seeking as well validation. The last function is tangible. And tangible is something that you want, which is an item. It could be a toy, food, a mobile, video games, anything that you can receive an item in your hand. Identifying the function of the behavior, it can help a provider to identify the reasons of those behaviors. Applied behavior analysis is built on the three-term contingency, and they are antecedent, behavior, and consequences. Antecedent is a change of environment that occurs after the behavior. Another way of saying it, like triggers, things that triggers. For example, like a person enters a room, a child takes a toy, a phone ringing, feeling hungry, or a change of noise, and so on. Behavior is anything that can be observed or measured. For example, walking, talking, hitting, itching, throwing, and so on. Consequences is something that is presented, removed, or withheld after behavior occurs. People usually actually assume that consequences is something bad, when actually it's not unnecessarily something bad. It could be good or bad. For example, earning a toy, a praise, timeout, spanking, even receiving a pain after you burned your hand from the stove.
One of the main questions we are asked as applied behavior analysts is how to manage or address aggressive or maladaptive behavior. Initially, the first step would be to observe the behavior happen in its natural environment. And through that, we are able to identify what keeps the behavior happening and what happens in the environment as a consequence that could be maintaining that maladaptive behavior. Once we determine the maintaining consequence, we are then able to devise intervention packages to address those maladaptive behaviors by either teaching new behaviors or extinguishing them. So the first step is to no longer provide the reinforcer to the maladaptive behavior. Let's take, for an example, a child that tantrums every time you take away the iPad. Then the caregiver is instructed to not provide the iPad if the child tantrums. So that's the first step. However, with an intervention like that, caregivers usually have to be warned that there is something called an extinction burst. So if you no longer provide the reinforcer, the behavior will then escalate and it will get worse before it gets better. So there's a preparation period that needs to occur as you're implementing the intervention. The second step would be to provide reinforcement for an alternative behavior. So if we look back at the same example, the child that tantrumed for wanting the iPad will then be taught to say more iPad or more time, if the child is able to vocalize that need. If not, then there are a lot of other strategies that we could use, such as picture exchange systems or sign language, that allow the child to use more appropriate communication modes to express their wants and needs rather than tantruming or using aggressive behavior. Evidence shows that alternative behaviors that meet the function or the reinforcers that maintaining the behavior are more likely to succeed than those such as punishment or medication. Functional assessment is a continuous collaboration process that combines observing meaningful questions and listening to the family's stories regarding what are their priorities or behaviors that they wish to address for their child. There are three broad categories when it comes to functional assessments. The first one is an indirect measure of assessment, where we gather data that already exists, like medical records or school reports or psychological evaluations, or we can ask some questions and use rating scales from the parents, the caregivers, and sometimes the client or the individual themselves. Descriptive assessment is the second type of assessment that's conducted in applied behavior analysis. And through that, the behavior analyst will collect data and observe the behavior as it happens in the environment. We collect antecedent and consequence data. So antecedent, as Basma had mentioned, is anything that occurs prior to the behavior. Consequence is anything that occurs after the behavior. The last form of assessment is a functional analysis, which represents a more sophisticated and precise method of mirroring experimental design to identify the environmental context in which behavior occurs. And we do that by systematically changing the environment to evaluate the effect of the different conditions on the behavior.
Reinforcement is a type of consequences increases the likelihood of behavior. Some people object to use reinforcer for various reasons. Some may feel use of reward is unnatural thing. That is because you have witnessed the reinforcement incorrectly and without having a plan to fade out. In general, all of us as people, we are all motivated by reinforcement. For example, with your paycheck, your bonuses, vacation, hobbies, or the company of others. We are all fulfilled because of the reinforcement that occurs in our lives. People often opposition to use reward because of believing that it constitutes bribery. However, if one uses reinforcement correctly, then it's not considered bribery. Let me give you an example in everyday life. A bribery would be something that waiting until a person refuses to do something and then negotiating a reward. Or, for example, when a child's being disruptive and you tell him if you stop and then he will receive a reward, then this is not a correct way of reinforcement. You don't want to keep on reminding a person of the reward during their disruptive behavior, because if you announce a reward, then you're giving them an opportunity to negotiate or consider whether it is worth or not to exhibit an appropriate behavior. This is the difference between reinforcement versus bribery.
The second consequence is punishment, and punishment is actually a hot topic. Unfortunately, there's an unnecessary stigma that surrounds the word punishment, and that's mostly as a result of improper use or negative past experiences, or simply not understanding what punishment really is. In applied behavior analysis, punishment means that a behavior is less likely to occur following the introduction of a particular consequence. So if the behavior reduces, then that's considered a punishment. There are a lot of aversive stimuli or actions that don't necessarily cause the behavior to decrease. If following the consequence in the future occurrence of the behavior did not decrease, then that is not considered a punishment. For example, a child that is disruptive in the classroom is sent to the principal's office. The next day, the child is disruptive again, and he's sent again to the principal's office. The way that we think punishment occurs is that we are punishing the child by taking them out of the classroom and sending them to the principal's office. However, if the child's behavior of being disruptive in the classroom does not decrease, then that consequence is not a punishment. Another example is getting a speeding ticket. If you get the speeding ticket and the speeding ticket makes you not speed in the future, then that is punishment. But if you take the speeding ticket and you put it in your glove compartment and you continue to speed, then that ticket had no punishing value or was not considered a punishment. The third consequence is extinction. And extinction is when a reinforcement is withheld following a behavior. A good example would be a child that makes jokes constantly in the classroom. And he does that to get all the peers to laugh and to be disruptive in the classroom. If the peers are instructed to no longer laugh at the child's jokes, and then the joking stops or decreases, then we can say that extinction has occurred, and the reinforcer is no longer provided to the child to maintain his behavior.
As an ABA therapist, we graph our data in order to demonstrate or visually illustrate the relationship in the data. The purpose of the graph is able to quickly present our information related to the comparison. It can also allow many other audience to understand the presentation fully. So for example, like after we wanted to show how your child is doing, or to present to the teachers or the schools how's the child's progressing, immediately we can open the data and you would immediately understand what we are presenting and how they are progressing.
Having been in Bahrain for the last 12 years, I could confidently say that Bahrain is moving in the right direction when it comes to applying this incredible field to help the larger and wider population, not only for kids with autism spectrum disorder, but a variety of other difficulties, learning difficulties.
We do hope many youngsters will actually study ABA in the future in order to improve our education system and other sectors in our beautiful kingdom.